Good evening, good day. Welcome to IWF Female Focus, our second webinar. For the spring, we have a counter going down to 3-minute counter, and then we will start presenting our presenters. And we have with us today the IWF interim president saying our welcoming words, and presenters from the continent of Pan America and from New Zealand, Oceania, and members from Europe. This will be a worldwide presentation. And 3 minutes sounds really long when you're waiting. This time we will have some breaks in between. We'll put the 2-minute clock on so that between the presentations, if you need to run to the kitchen or something, you may do that. And we'll give a little break for the people. Or even best, just get up and do some squats, get some blood flowing. Meditation. It's great to see people here. We've got last minute going before we start airing with presentations. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Carolina Lundahl, and I am the chair of the IWF Women's Commission. And I'm gladly presenting to open our second webinar is our IWF interim president, Dr. Michael Irani. Please.
Thank you very much indeed. You said that I'm going to give you the welcoming. In fact, you've given me the welcoming address because I'm delighted to be here, and I think it's a great honor, not just for me, but also for other people who are asked to present, because this shows the amount of knowledge and information on a practical basis that we're going to hear, and this is the most exciting part, I think. The other important thing is that it's a funny old world. You know, when we first had COVID, we were wondering what the heck is this thing, and it was running rampant. We're hopefully getting it under control now, but still we have to be extremely vigilant. I know the European Championships are going to be held next week in Russia, and there they have to be extremely careful, and they're aware of that. But I hope everybody else will be careful and not get it. Women in weightlifting, when it first started, I remember, Caroline, you were there, weren't you? It was in Florida, and it was revolutionary. There was no uniform as such, and women were turning up in high-cut swimming costumes and things, and it was very strange indeed. And I think it just looked a bit circus-like, but now it's becoming much more serious, much more serious, and they can take the men on at their own game. It's an honor for me to be here. Thank you very much, Carolina, for asking me to present and introduce you lot. You're all going to give us a great evening, and I'm really glad that I was asked to be here. Bless you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Mike. Yes, I've been very lucky to see my coach, Jaakko Kailajärvi from Finland, who has been a guru in weightlifting for us, how he traveled in the 60s with his own camera and he filmed, and he has actually made a VCR recording of those. It is just priceless. And it's great to see, having seen also the women come first, the first women who came out competing, and seeing also the men lifting in the early 60s. It does resemble all our athletes nowadays are hardworking athletes, and with the goal of lifting one day at the Olympics. I will present now our panelists. And so I am the chair of the Women's Commission. My name is Carolina Lundahl. Then we have Dr. Heather Allison. Hello, Heather. She is joining us from London. Then we have Nirali King. She is joining us from New Zealand, our Women's Commission member. Sarah Davies, Athletes Commission Chair, also joining us from Britain. And our last panelist has a cancellation, Puros Dimas. Unfortunate. We will be looking at a 2-hour set. So for the Zoom listeners, there's a question and answer Q&A tab. You may click on it and leave questions. The panel will review the incoming questions and sort them by topic, tagging on a presenter's name so they can answer it. So at the end, our presenters will then answer some of the questions, and there might be a possibility that the rest of the questions will be answered via email when you leave your contact information. All this, of course, time willing. And for your knowledge, all participants will be muted throughout the webinar. We will now start with our first presenter, Dr. Kyle Pierce. Kyle is a professor at Louisiana State University, Shreveport, in the Department of Kinesiology and Health Science. He's the director for the LSU Shreveport Weightlifting Development Center, and his research has dealt with training stress and long-term athlete development. He has coached weightlifters for over 40 years, including several Olympians. And Kyle's topic today is considerations for men coaching women. Okay, Kyle, please.
Over the top here. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Carolina. I thank the Women's Commission, the IWF, for allowing me to present. It's an honor for me to be part of this, very much. I was also, as Dr. Irani mentioned, and Carolina, the 1987 World Championships in Daytona Beach, and I was fortunate enough to be there to see that competition, and women's weightlifting has come a long way since then. Today, I'd like to talk about considerations for men coaching women. I'm going to focus on 3 areas here, maybe focus a little bit more on the first area than the next 2. I sort of tried to use a little, use the 3 A's here. We're going to look at awareness. And with awareness, we're going to talk about similarities with men and women, some differences. And we're going to talk about some health issues. We're also going to talk about appropriateness. And finally, with assessing quality information. Now, the emphasis is on awareness, because we know that there's many more similarities than differences, but men coaches and women coaches as well need to be aware of what differences that there may be with the individual athletes that they coach. Now, start right away with considerations for youth weightlifting. Very similar, particularly prior to puberty, height, weight, body size. We might see some small differences in muscle cross-sectional areas. we'll see steady gains in strength till about 13 years of age, even though boys might be slightly stronger than girls of the same height during childhood. And we also see linear increases in isometric and low velocity concentric strength from about the ages of 5 to 7 until it says 13 to 15. Now, training considerations, no difference up to puberty. And, you know, there should be very little difference, you know, in the training plan. As we'll talk several times here, there might possibly need to be some more upper body training for women. And as many weightlifting coaches deal with other athletes and work as strength coaches, there's a need to work on landing strategies. But that may not be something that's quite necessary if you're working with weightlifting, because they're going to be strong in those areas. Of course, the change, puberty. 8 to 13 in girls, 9 to 15 in boys. Girls start a little bit earlier than boys. We hear so much about weightlifting, long-term athlete development. You know, there's different phases. Some of this has changed. You know, the point of this is that, you know, there's not really much in the way of training differently. It's just some different stages, and the age groups might be a little bit different. However, notice that there's, you know, quite a range there for both the men and the women, that they sort of overlap. What we need to be concerned about with the kids is more probably emotional and physical maturity than whether we're coaching boys or girls at that age. Now, let's talk about a few similarities here. And several studies here, two by Sanborn and Tiapale. Men can gain strength at the same relative rate as men. Depends on the commitment of both. You may have seen this slide. This is Meg Stone used this in the first female focused webinar. And I've borrowed a few of her slides as well as the other two presenters in that webinar that you'll see. I talked to a good friend of mine the other day, Lynn Jones. I've known Lynn for years. And he coached Tara Knott, who won the 2000 Olympics, first year that women competed in the Olympics. She was a 48 kilo gold medalist. So basically the first gold medalist for women's weightlifting in the Olympics. And Lynn said, I said, are there any similarities, differences, Lynn? And he said, women respond to the same training stimulus as men. Now, we are going to look at some differences. And remember, these are not going to occur in all the women that you coach. This is going to be vary. It's going to vary just like it does with men. There's variations with you know, the men that we coach. But again, the awareness, be aware. Some of the primary considerations we'll look at are muscle fiber type, the skeletal system, and hormonal consideration. And all these have a genetic basis. Now, regarding skeletal muscle, really there's little or no differences in mean percentage of muscle fiber types. Females may have smaller muscle mass, and in comparison with men, smaller muscle mass and a smaller cross-sectional area. Again, we're talking about women in general. We're not talking about trained athletes. Serrano found when he looked at national level men in the US compared to international competitors, that it was a small sample, but the international women had larger a percentage of fast twitch fibers than the men. And this can be attributed to both a combination of their training and genetics. Now, regarding force capabilities of women, in general, women generate less absolute and relative force and power. As it says here, somewhat less power per kilogram of body mass and some evidence indicates less power per unit of volume of muscle. So there may be some slight differences here. We see that in the lower body, the differences are less, okay? And again, you know, may need to focus on that upper body strength as a coach there with the women that you coach, possibly. Rate of force development is typically lower in men, lower in women than men, and this is a result of both nervous system and muscle fiber type. It's interesting to note that as athletes improve, as we look at elite athletes, there's less differences. So if you look at recreational lifters, men versus women, find quite a bit of change, quite a bit of difference. As they get better, the differences lessen. So with elite female lifters, you're going to see less differences than with the male lifters in that particular sport. A few differences related to biomechanics and anthropometrics. Women are generally shorter, smaller, short limb length, shorter arm lever. The carrying angle is different, and this relates to overhead support and could possibly contribute to a greater injury in the elbow. Hip to shoulder ratio, of course, men have a larger hip to shoulder ratio, but women tend to have greater leg to height ratios. They have more mass in their lower body, and of course, as we all, something that's pretty much generally known, they have a lower center of gravity. And, you know, it's questionable as to whether this is an advantage or a disadvantage for weightlifting, okay? And again, differences are smaller as the athlete level increases up to a more elite level. Now, endocrine differences. Men at rest have 5 times the resting androgen concentration of women, but remember, this varies, okay? It varies within women and it varies within men. In general, there's higher testosterone concentrations. You know, they're genetic, well, let me just go back. They're genetically related in both men and women. So again, we're going to see differences within women and within men. Okay, but even, you know, these small differences can make a big difference, okay? You know, women athletes, particularly strength power athletes, tend to have a higher testosterone concentration than non-athletes. So again, it goes back to the genetics do play a part, even though the training plays a big part as well. Okay, now I mentioned I borrowed from the first webinar here, and this is a slide that used by Kimberly Santa Barbara, talking about some changes during the menstrual cycle. Okay, so you know we have the hormones can affect many things. They can cause changes from everything to mood, appetite, you know, how our minds work, our cognitive functioning, our energy, and can, to some degree, performance. The most common time for the women to experience these symptoms is in the premenstrual cycle time, okay, or during the onset of menses. Some of the more common symptoms include menstrual cramps, decreased energy levels, food cravings or changes in appetite, changes in mood, and sleep disruption. This is something I got from Dr. Stone and Meg. It was a survey they did at East Tennessee State University with female lifters. All mentioned weakness of the lower back during menstruation, fatigue, cramping, general aches, emotional frustration. However, Dr. Stone told me one of these women was put on birth control, and it seemed to take care of a lot of the problems that she did have. Okay, I found a good article recently here, back to 2021. And it was entitled, What Male Coaches Want to Know About the Menstrual Cycle in Women's Team Sports. And I feel this applies as well to individual sports. So some of the things they found that men wanted to know, men who coach women, or maybe need to know, how does training need to be managed? How do we manage the training? Do we do it any different? Do we do it the same? How is physical performance impacted, or is it? Are there any medical and dietary considerations? And when and how should we communicate with the athletes? So it's a skill that a coach, desires to have, and it's very important to be able to communicate with your athletes. And we definitely need to communicate with if you're a male coaching females, you need to be able to communicate with those females that you're coaching. And also the fifth item that they were interested in is how are athletes affected psychologically and emotionally. Okay, some of the recommendations they made. There's a need for a comprehensive education framework to increase the knowledge. As you can see, they talk about facilitating better recognition and referral of the female athletes regarding any menstrual dysfunction and health issues. Collaboration between athletes, coaches, medical and dietary professionals, sports psychologists as well. And again, we talk about this communication between athletes and the coaches. Now, this is not just for men coaches. I mean, these are what men, according to this article, what men coaches want to know or need to know. But, this is something that female coaches need to know too. And the female athletes has been pointed out. We always assume that maybe the female athletes know, have all the knowledge related to this issue, but not necessarily. Their conclusion was that there's insufficient evidence available to appropriately modify an athlete's training based on their individual cycling. Okay, and they said that we should treat menstrual-related symptoms the same way we would with any other monitoring tool that we're using regarding the athlete's well-being and their performance. In addition to education and monitoring, another study that I found talked about point of contact and menstrual cycle profiles. Now, of course, the coach does need to communicate. However, possibly there's somebody in a coaching group, in a support system that might be more comfortable with that. But that might be a downside because you're getting secondhand information. If you have somebody that gets that information, that's the point of contact with a female athlete, there may be something lost in the communication. So, I believe that it's best if the coach directly deals with that. Menstrual cycle profiles would be great to have, a history profile, medical details, symptoms, and of course the perceived impact on training and performance. I will mention something. I did a solidarity course years ago, and I talked about, basically the same thing, talked about some women in weightlifting, and I talked about the menstrual cycle. And when I was finished with that presentation, we took a break, I got stormed. The women all came after me, and I thought, oh, what did I say? Did I do something wrong? And no, I didn't do anything wrong. They were happy that I addressed the issue. And they all wanted to talk to me because they felt that their coaches needed to address the issue more. And that is the case. They do. Coaches should address this issue. Now we'll talk about just some monitoring in general, which is important both for men and women that you coach. There's two aspects of monitoring: fatigue management and program efficacy, which deals with is it really working? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing, and are you getting it to work and peak at the right time? There's both micro and macro monitoring. Micro is individual session monitoring, and macros over a period of time. Fatigue management, often micro, looks at you could use vertical jumps, maybe weighted jumps, session ratings of perceived exertion, and some stress recovery questionnaires. Program efficacy would be measurements at critical points in the training, particularly with strength, explosiveness, rate of force development, velocity, and power tests. And again, this is something that needs to be done on a regular basis. It needs to be built into the annual plan, not something that's just done on occasion. Additional monitoring could include testing, if you have access to a lab and some more sophisticated equipment, hydrostatic weighing, bod pod, bioelectrical impedance, refractometry can be used, both in the field and in the lab, force plates, linear transducers, accelerometers. Of course, we can do blood work and look at particularly the testosterone to cortisol ratio. That would be very effective. In the field, we can look at skin folds, use switch mats, accelerometry, and 1RM. Look at repetition maximum in certain lifts. Most everybody could do resting exercise and recovery, heart rate and blood pressure, and also weigh people, look at their body mass. Menstrual cycle survey would be good. I talked to Kara Head Slaughter a while ago and asked her. She says there's an app that she uses. There's a lot of apps. I looked around, there's quite a few that are used and can be helpful. Training logs, nutrition logs, sleep patterns, injury reporting, and technique analysis. All these can be used in athlete monitoring. Of course, one of the reasons we do monitor and identify the effectiveness of training and identify limiting factors, particularly strength and power, the performance indicators, peak force, peak power, and rate of force development. Also some technique type items, bar path, peak velocity, vertical displacement, and drop distance. Okay, I'm going to go through this fairly quick. This is, Kara went over this in her talk. We put this survey together on looking at how coaches perceived any differences in men and women. So this was something that we did together here. And you can see, the perception by some coaches and their experience, I would say, is that some see difference. Most of them saw that everybody should train the same, but you can see a few differences here, and I'll just go through some of these. While boys need to be encouraged, women often need to be encouraged to be more assertive after their social conditioning, while boys need to be encouraged to be calm and focused. Okay. Women like to learn and please and soak up knowledge. Most men think they know it all and are all going to be pros. Okay. Women are more emotional than the men, so a coach needs to be more sensitive in what is said. Okay, confidence is on the women's side is always lacking, on the men's side not as much. Okay, now again, this is a survey, these are opinions, so I always like to distinguish between what is my opinion, someone else's opinion, and what is in the literature, peer review. Okay, I'll just go through some of these because I know I got a half hour here, and these are fun to go through. This will be on the website. You'll be able to look at some of these here. And again, these are some of the things that Kara addressed there. Okay. Men may have the same lack of confidence as women, but may mask it better. according to one coach. Okay. Treat everyone the same by treating everyone different. This is one that came in, after Kara's talk, and one coach said that my main struggle has been health issues and with women's diet and body image issue. I think that's changing to a degree. I think, over the years, it's become more acceptable for women to, be strong and have muscles and such. So I think that, but still, again, awareness, be aware of what goes on. Okay. Found this wasn't, Mia Hamm did not respond to the survey, but I found this, that her opinion says, coach us like men, but treat us like women. Okay, some of the differences, the possible explanations deal with genetics, physiological differences, cultural implications, and of course, training status. But again, this still needs to be a lot of research on why the differences exist when they do. This is something that was gone over in the first seminar again, but thought I'd bring it back up again since it is related to health. We talk about the health. The female athlete triad, low energy availability as a result of disordered eating, irregular period, including amenorrhea, low bone density, and possibly osteoporosis. Now, men are affected by this also, some components of this. And so what we look at more, and what the sports scientists look at, are the relative energy deficiency in sport, the red S, okay? So it refers to this impaired physiological functioning caused by the energy deficiency, and may include metabolic rate, menstrual function, bone health, immunity, protein synthesis, and cardiovascular health. The cause is the imbalance between dietary intake and energy expenditure required for health and in our daily activities, including sporting activities. Psychological consequences can either precede red S or be the result of red S. As it says, the clinical, it's not a triad of three entities, but it's a syndrome that affects many physiological, that affects many the aspects of physiological function, health, and our athletic performance. Now, in weightlifting, it may not be as great an issue, not typically encountered. It's probably in weightlifting more common in lighter classes, or if an athlete's attempting to lift in a class, way below where they should be competing, okay? Trying to cut too much weight. Just a few more health issues. Women are 6 to 10 times more likely to tear an ACL than men in the same sport. Maybe that's another thing that we may have to have some additional preparation for. Several different causes, as you can see. There's some differences related to ankle dorsiflexion, possibly femur hip external rotation, and of course with this, body mass is a compounding factor. Some people feel women, and the research has shown they may be more asymmetrical. However, this is questionable. More overuse injuries in women, higher injury rates generally occur in the lower body, though we are familiar and know that the elbow can be an issue as well, the result of the carrying angle and hyperextension of the elbow. Low back weakness is something that's important, and it needs to be attended to, and if not, it can lead to further injury. Okay, so that's some of the things that, not totally inclusive, but some things I feel that's important for men to be aware of, for women to be aware of regarding women and coaching them. Appropriateness is very important. One-on-one interactions, you know, if you're going to have meetings, individual training sessions, personal trainings, have somebody, you know, else there, preferably a female coach. Don't get into texting the athletes there. You know, send it in groups, you know, copy people. Don't get caught up in all that, things like that. Transportation, don't drive an athlete home alone. Touching, it says think and ask before you touch. I mean, possibly, you know, when you're teaching someone, a lot of coaches like to put their hands on. Probably be better if you had a female coach who could do that rather than a male coach. You know, with competition, maybe a slap on the shoulders might be better than elsewhere. Maybe a side hug rather than a front hug, possibly. It depends on the situation, but just be aware. It says think and ask before you touch. On trips, don't have a female in your hotel room, and don't go barging into females' rooms. So this is just a few things, but just think before you act there. Be appropriate. Third thing I want to talk about is the access of information. You know, try to use peer-reviewed articles, and even with that, read the article. Good. A lot of people just read the abstract. Some people just read the titles. Say, "Oh, look what I found," you know, and they base things based, you know, on what they just looked at the title and with the abstract. Little things you should note when you read a study, though: sample size, their level of performance, a lot of difference between recreational lifters and elite level lifters. Look at the ages, length of the training. Sometimes the studies are very short. Baseline measurements, if somebody's not very, you know, proficient on what they're being tested on, they're going to have great gains, so watch for that. And the type of exercise being performed, you know, distinguish between things like aerobic, anaerobic, resistance training, weightlifting. They all may be different when you look at these studies. Opinions, blogs, popular press, things that you Google on the internet, social media. That's where a lot of people go, but that's not always the best source of information. And if you do find a good study, don't base all your decisions on that one study. Look for a body of research there. Another thing, you know, successful coaches can be a great source, but, you know, and when they're presenting and talking about the athletes they've coached, to make sure, you know, if it's an international coach who's coached primarily high-level athletes, or they're giving their presentation on the high-level athletes they've coached, that may not apply to you if you're not working with those high-level athletes. You may need to adapt what they presented to your particular situation. Some of us are coaching amateur athletes, whereas we might be looking at someone who coaches a more high-level professional athlete. So keep that in mind. I've put some, this will be on, you know, these are some sources that I use primarily: PubMed, Google Scholar. There's some more out there, Worldwide Science. These are search engines that'll, you know, guide you to more peer-reviewed journals there. And one final thing I'd like to mention is regarding sports science. And I think all of us that have coached know that coaching is a combination of science and art. You know, it's both. We need to know the science. You know, we're trying to present some science today. Any chance that you have or opportunities to learn more about science, you should take advantage of. You know, physiology and nutrition, biomechanics, psychology, motor learning, motor development. You know, try to learn as much of those as you can. As my friend Dr. Stone always says, he says, you know, coaches should be like physicians, medical doctors. Medical doctors study science so they can better practice the art of medicine. coaches should try to do the same. They should study science so they can better practice the art of coaching. So, appreciate everyone being here today. I know you're the people that are trying to learn more and to learn the science behind doing what you do. I've put a few different sports science organizations with links here. This will be available on the website there. This is my email if you have any questions. If you want any other information, don't hesitate to email me. If I don't know the answer, I won't make something up. I'll go search out somebody that does have the answer. So please email me if there's any concerns or questions that you have. And thank you so much for being here. Thanks again for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Kyle. Excellent. And yes, I see that there's some hand raising and then the Q&A session. So please be aware that you can only ask your questions by sending them via just typing it in. That's the only way we get them in. Okay. Thank you very much. And if we can get our 2-minute clock going for our next presenter. And so next up will be Jenny Ortiz Cardenas from Colombia. Jenny has an earlier background in weightlifting as an athlete and as a coach. She is currently active in powerlifting as an educator and technical official. She's a professor at El Bosque University in Colombia, and she specializes in sports sciences. Jenny will show us 2 case studies that were completed in the sport of powerlifting about female participation at the world-class level. And the first study includes female technical officials, or as we call them, TOs. And the second one is female athletes. So we'll have a little less than a minute break here when we switch then screens, and we will welcome Jenny. So this is a good time to get up and get some blood flowing from sitting, do some squats. Okay. Zoli, can you see that comment? Yes, here we go. Excellent. So Jenny, please.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you for the Commission, Female Commission IWF. Thank you for the Federation for this possibility to participate with you in this important event. And thank you, Dr. Kelly, for the previous presentation. It's very interesting for me also. Today I'll present two researches that's part of the first researches we had to approach to a program we have. Its name is She Can Lift. It's a program we are developing for increase the participation of females in different options we have in powerlifting. As you know, in the Paralympic sport, we have options to participate as a technical official, as an athlete, that's a principal form, and as a classifier, technical classifier, and also as a coach. Then we were touched in this case 2 options that we have to participate. First of all, I present you the researchers, me, myself, from University El Bosque, Ivan Perdomo from University Uniminuto, and we had an agreement between World Pro Powerlifting and Arandina University. That's the reason why we have 4 students from this university: Michael Lozano, Cristian Sanchez, Juan Reyes, and Giovanni Pastrana. And they now they obtained their degree in sports training, but during the time we were developing the research, they were students. So this is part of degree study. The first, okay. Then the first I present for you is the result of the technical official participation in powerlifting. We were trying to analyze the perceived barriers and facilitators in this population. Oops. Okay, now it's working better. Our objective in this case was discover the barriers and facilitators for female participation in the practice of powerlifting as a technical official. In both cases, we developed this research in the Bogota 2018 America's Open Championship that was event that is part of the Road to Tokyo 2020. Then it was a good opportunity for us to have a lot of information because we had a good population, a good female population to interview. In this case, the sample was 10 female technical officials. We had in this competition 12. One of them refused to be part of the research, and me, myself, then I couldn't participate in that. In this sample, we have national officials and international officials. Then we have information in both ways. They were fulfilling the survey of barriers and facilitators for female technical officials in powerlifting. It is an instrument that was approved by the ethics committee from Arandina University, and it was divided in 2 steps. The first part was a simple answer questions that was approached. Like they had the first approach to the sport, and after a Likert scale that was scored in 5 points. When they scored 1, they were saying was very little importance for them. This item has a very little importance for their opinion. 2 was little importance. 3 was important. 4 was very important, and 5 was completely important. Now we will see the first part. Then in the first approach, they have the reasons why they start to be in powerlifting, how was their approach to the sport, why they started to perform in powerlifting, what kind of benefits they perceive at the beginning, and what kinds of barriers and facilitators they perceive at the beginning. And in the second part, that's the research core, they show us the barriers and facilitators they feel now. They feel exactly at the moment at the research time. And also they had the opportunity to leave free comments, not only to answer the questions we had there. Then at the end of the presentation, I show you what were the summarize of that. Okay, then the results in the first part, the reasons they perceive or they say why they started to perform in powerlifting. We use the mood for all the research, and then the mood in this case was love of the sport. They say that they feel the love for the sport in general. And the second option of importance is the social environment. It means they had some relation with people involved in powerlifting. Also, we had the other option that you find here. Then some of them had the possibility to have professional growth, others obtained a friend invitation, and others country invitations. Their approach or their form to arrive in powerlifting was the family environment. This is the report they provide us. It means many of them have people of their family, relatives or something like that, involved in powerlifting. And also social environment, again, is the form to go to powerlifting. As you can see here, we had others that arrive in powerlifting because of the degree thesis or university contact, and many of them professionals in sport. They started to perform because they have an affinity for sport. It is demonstrated here when we talk about the people professional in the sport, or they have some kind of relation with the sport previous to the knowledge about powerlifting. And the other in the secondary record is be an example for others. Then technical officials feel that they can be example for the society when they are performing as a technical official in this sport. As a benefit, they find they know new cultures. This is very interesting because they are trying to have a good contact with other people from other parts of the world. And also they feel they can provide service, obtain knowledge, and they have some kind of close relation for sport. At the beginning, they found barriers in lack of sport promotion. Then they couldn't obtain a good opportunity to know well the sport at the beginning. Maybe they delay their immersion in the sport because the sport didn't have a good promotion. And also they consider they didn't have enough sports venues. Then it was another barrier that they found at the beginning. Also broken communication, but also we found people saying they didn't feel barriers at the beginning. As a facilitators, they found their own passion for the sport and the affinity for the competition. So many of them were involved in competitions before, and that's why they started to perform as a technical officials in powerlifting. Some of them find interesting, and as a facilitator, international destinations for international competitions, community service, sport results, affinity or the love for sport results, and they found their personal goals as a facilitator in the performance in powerlifting. In the Likert scale, we were asking about the barriers and facilitators they feel in the moment of the survey. Then they had divided barriers, and facilitators were divided in sports management and self-report. Then we have two modes here. It means they were thinking that in this moment we didn't have enough sport training venues, and it means that for many of them were very important, but for some of them was not important. For the not enough government support, they consider this is a big barrier. It means they thought that at the moment the support of the governments was very, very low for powerlifting. They consider in this moment promotion of the sport was not important, and is important and very important for them the insufficient adaptation and provision of sport venues. As you know, when we are talking about people with some kind of disability, especially for us that we have physical impairments, the reduction of the mobility needs some kind of adaptation in the venues, and many times we cannot find this kind of adaptations for our athletes. And sometimes we can find a building with a good adaptation, but it's not provided with the complete equipment that they need. Also, they found very important as a barrier the low frequency of our competitions. Currently, we can have more even after the lockdown. We start to have our competitions, but before 2018, really we had a low number of competitions. They consider they have a good support of their family, and they consider they didn't have a good recognition, that it was a barrier for them. And also they have a perception of lack of information, but they consider they didn't have any kind of barrier with their time or their economy. As a facilitator, they found that government support was important, economic support was important, and also to have a sport venue availability and adaptation. And they consider good support of their family, the social interaction. They found their a good answer for their passion of the sport. They didn't have any problem for travel destinations of time, and they found was interesting or important as a facilitator their personal growth and learning foreign language. It also was a facilitator for them. Then for our technical officials so all summarizing the information they provide for us, they needed to find social recognition. They could use their free time, and this activity as a technical official helps them to improve their self-confidence. They consider also we don't have as a sport a good massive communication, and so we were not using it at the moment our social media in a good form, or they didn't find it very active, and they find some difficulties for training, but not for them, but for the athletes in their countries. So as a conclusion in this research, they provided us the feedback we should improve the sports promotion, improve the quantity and quality of information of our sport, increase the competition frequency, because as I told you before, we had less competitions at the moment of the research. And they consider very important the governmental support for our athletes and also for technical officials to develop their own education to obtain the possibility to travel, to continue growing as a technical official. And they also consider the adaptation and provision of sports venues will be helpful for the development in powerlifting, especially for female athletes. And now I'll present you what was the perception of barriers and facilitators for female athletes in our sport. The objective in this case is score the barriers and facilitator in females participation and the practice of the pro powerlifting as an athlete in Americas region. In this case, we were focusing Americas region because, as I told you, and as is there, we were in the Americas Open Championships. This competition was regional, but also was open. Then that's why we were focusing in Americas region. We had only 2 athletes from outside America, one from Lithuania and the other from Japan. We had in the total 49 female powerlifting athletes, and they use a survey of barriers and facilitators with practice for female athletes in powerlifting, exactly the same structure that we have for the technical officials, only change a little bit the questions. And again, we were asking about their first approach and all the reasons, how they had their approach, why they started to perform in pro powerlifting, what kinds of benefits they receive at the beginning, and what kinds of barriers and facilitators they had at the beginning. And the second part, we were asking again at the moment of the research, what kinds of barriers and facilitators they were feeling. The reason, because they started to be in para powerlifting as a competitors, was the love of the sport. And also they reported self-esteem and self-confidence improvement. I don't know if you know, but in the Paralympic sport, when you are working with people with some kind of disability, you need to reinforce their self-esteem and their self-confidence and all their self-feelings, because when you have some kind of disability, the society many times reinforce them a bad self-feelings, then they find in sports that capacity to improve their security, their self-esteem, their self-confidence, their self-view. Then this is one of the important reports we find in this research. They obtained their first approach to the sport for their social environment. It means they found or friends or some kind of person close to them. Then we didn't have any approach to them for radio, TV, internet, or social media. They started to perform in pro powerlifting because they liked the competition, and they were asking or trying to find recognition. This is also important. I think it is important for all the athletes in different competitions, able body or Paralympic sport. But in this case, is bigger the feeling of the necessity of recognition. Okay, the benefits they found there was health. When people have some kind of disability, many times because of the time in this or with this reduce of the mobility, they reduce their health because they are sedentaries and they are not doing anything close to other people. Then it's not only involved their physical health, it's also involved the psychological health. Also, again, they found they improved their self-esteem. As barriers, they found 2 kinds of barriers: not enough sports venues and not enough governmental support. That is the common form we find as a barrier at the beginning when we are starting pro powerlifting in any country, because it's not easy to find the buildings with adaptations, Also, it's not easy to find government with that disposition to provide money for our athletes or for people trying to be athlete in a new Paralympic sport. Also, they found insufficient adaptation of or provision for the sports venue. As I told you at the beginning, sometimes you can find a building with ramps, but it's not enough to have ramps when you don't have plates or bars or the bench. Then they found this kind of barrier in their countries. As a facilitators, their own passion for the sports was the first facilitator, and also health and competition was the other facilitators they found at the beginning. Going to the card to the research, the barriers they found at the moment, they didn't have any kind of barrier. As you can see, they are recording everything and they are scoring everything with one. It means it's not important at all, any kind of barrier we were presenting. And now they found as facilitators, they had good support from their government, economic support, sports venues with adaptation and provision. Their family were supporting them. They had good relationship with their peers. They continue with their passion for sport. They had time. They were improving their health. They were able to use their time, their free time, and they continue growing as athletes. And also something that is interesting, I found they find their physical appearance improving, and then it is a facilitator for them. This is something interesting because, as you know, in any kind of a sport of strength, many times other people will say, you cannot do that because you will change the form of your body and you will look as a man. And many of the girls don't want to be there because they say, I don't want to look like a man, I want to be a girl. And in this case, they were saying this is one of the facilitators they find, and is very good because they could break this barrier, this social view, and have a good report of that. Then summarizing, we find that our athletes are trying to improve their wellness there. In powerlifting, they can use their free time, and they can work over the medical prescription. They need to be active to reduce any kind of risk of illness. They also consider we have low use of social media to promote our sport. They consider as a risk if their family reduce the support for them to continue at the sport. One special topic that they touched was they consider we have a shortage of coaches training in the sport. This is something that was part of our expectations because, as you know, it's not too easy to find coaches trained in Paralympic sport. Frequently, the coach will work and you will find all the evidence information developed for able-bodied athletes, but it's very reduced evidence about para athletes. Then it is one of the situations that we face frequently, and we are trying to improve the information and the form to educate more coaches for our athletes. In conclusion, they consider we need to improve the sports promotion and the information we provide for others about powerlifting, exactly the same that the technical officials were saying. They consider it's important to keep the economic support and the governmental support to be able to continue performing as an athlete. And they consider they need more venues with availability, adaptation, and provision for exactly for powerlifting. And they consider they need to have their family as support, because sometimes the big barrier will be their family. If the family will say you cannot do it, many times they cannot go to the venue to have their training. Then the final conclusion for the athletes, they think the first or the big summarize will be in autonomy. Autonomy is very important for all of us, but it's bigger when you have some kind of disability. Then they feel they can improve or have their own autonomy and govern their own body, their own life. For technical officials, they summarize everything in service. They consider they can be useful for the society, useful for others, useful for their own relatives around there, and useful for your countries. And empowerment is the word that they collect between athletes and technical officials. They consider is a good opportunity to have empowerment as a woman. Then thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you again, Carolina, for contacting me and give me the opportunity to share part of our research. This is my name, Jenny Cárdenas, and this is my email if you want to contact me.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. I just thought in Facebook, I saw this when the IOC president, Thomas Bach, was reelected. And so on March 10th, he said that we need to add to the faster, higher, stronger, we need to add the word together, because we're looking at the sport, and you look at the words: love of sport, family, athletes, love of sport, social environment, friends and family. These are exactly what we have in weightlifting. And then I love that one word in there also, passion, because we're all very passionate about our sport. So thank you, Jenny, very much.
Thank you.
We're ready to move on to our next share screen slide. And we are moving along to our last presentation. Unfortunately, we have had a cancellation, and Coach Tina will be our last presenter today. And she is here from New Zealand. So good morning, Tina. So Tina comes from a diverse background of strength and conditioning, fitness and classical Pilates, having owned her own facilities and an educational company focused on training the trainers. And so today, Tina will share us her thoughts on her coaching pathway. And as we're looking for the countdown, she's a Commonwealth Games coach, 2010, 2014, 2018, and more to come. Then also a 5-time world championship coach, over 20 years of international coaching and managing teams at Oceania and Commonwealth Championships, Youth Olympics, Commonwealth Youth Games, Pacific Games, including New Zealand Cup, club, and national level. She's also the founder of Strength HQ Olympic Weightlifting Club and a president of Olympic Weightlifting Auckland. So as our timer is going for that last 30 seconds, we will be waiting anxiously for Tina to start her presentation. Okay, does somebody have share screen still on? So that, yes, here we go.
I never started out wanting to be an Olympic weightlifting coach. In fact, when I was really young, I was obsessed by animals, and in particular horses. You'd find me after school and on the weekends, walking into the country, knocking on people's doors and asking if I could ride their horse. There was one big problem with this. I didn't even know how to ride. When I look back, it still makes me smile today that I had the tenacity and where there's a will, there's a way attitude, which has helped pave my way today. That and the generosity of the people who recognise my passion. So fast forward to today. Thank you to Sarah Davies, Chair of the IWF Athletes Commission, for inviting me to be part of this webinar. It's an honour and a privilege. And I also acknowledge the Women's Commission and the work they do. You know, what to say? I found that really challenging because sharing my coaching experiences is like, what? So I reached out to some women and I asked them, you know, like, what would you like to hear me talk about? And that has helped me shape what I have to share with you today. Because as coaches, we all face challenges, and the same challenges, regardless of whether we're a female or a male coach. And that is keeping our lifters engaged in the sport, helping them reach their full potential, dealing with the setbacks and adversities that they face, and you as the coach alongside with them. And then, of course, there's life. You know, the financial impact that some of them face, the different things that they're faced with as they grow in the sport. We all face that. So, however, I like to think that reality is a little bit different. And I'll skip this slide because Carolina did a wonderful job of presenting that. So here's my first perspective, which is about pathways, experiences, and opportunities. And if you look at that photo carefully, it's a group of our young men that came in from our secondary school program, and you might even recognise David. So often as women, we are our own biggest critics, and we have a tendency to be really hard on ourselves. And this can lead to doubting our own abilities because we don't hold ourselves up. And often there's not a lot of women around us because we work so much in isolation that we're not supported. My observation is that countries have different coaching pathways, which is often defined by the size of the sport and the resources available. I began coaching as a favour to a wonderful man who introduced me to the sport. His health was failing and he asked me to take over his athletes. There was no pathway. It was just, all right, I'm coaching now. So in creating my own pathway, I discovered that whether it was at a club, a national or an international event, that lifters lifted better when I was there, my own lifters that I'd got there, and that I had an ability to develop a rapport with any lifters that I was assigned to. One of my earliest experiences in Penang in 2009, very green, got to say very green on the international platform as a coach. And we had a team of New Zealand athletes, and I think there were 3 coaches at the time. I had my own athletes there, and I'd been allocated this particular lifter. All going well, warm up, you know, on time. We were going to make it to the platform with lots of confidence. And then one of my colleagues came over to me and said, "Oh, what are you starting your athlete on?" And I went, "Oh, here you go, here's my plan." And naively, I showed him everything, you know, like we're a team. At the end of that competition, his lifter finished ranked just one space above mine. That was such a valuable lesson for me, and one that I carry forward to this day. Bruce Cameron was my mentor and my coach for the duration of when I lifted, and I consider myself very blessed because Bruce Cameron is a 2 times bronze Commonwealth Games medalist. He was also the New Zealand Olympic selector for 28 years, can you believe it? And was awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2006. He taught me 2 things. Well, he taught me a lot of things, but the 2 I'm going to share with you today is number 1, you win first. Doesn't matter the numbers that you did in training and whether you actually achieve them or surpass them on the competition platform. You win first, and your job as coach is to get the best out of your athlete and the closest to the top finish on the podium that you can. That was one thing that stayed with me. The second was the importance of encouragement and developing confidence in your athletes in training. So those 2 things have helped me in my journey as a coach today. The biggest impact, and I've got to say it's the biggest, I still am blown away by it all these years later, 2015 World Championships. My first ever World Championships. Couple of coaches, 3 athletes. I was just blown away by the performances of those athletes that were competing at this event. You know, the loads they put their bodies under, you know, it was just phenomenal for me. You know, coming from little old New Zealand, being to a couple of low-level internationals, I had not seen that. And I walked away from that event with the word possible in my head. And possible is something that I have today. I say to David, I say to my other lifters, it's possible. My second perspective that I want to share with you is have a voice. You know, as women, we are all valuable contributors in the weightlifting world. But how do we create the pathways so that we are seen and heard? How do we empower other women to follow the pathways that they choose? How do we help them gain the opportunities? And I can't tell you how to have a voice. I just know that it's really important that we do, and that you need to seek ways to do that, whether you have to create your own pathway or buy in the support of others. One of my beliefs is very much that you have to lead from the front. And I've tried to do that as a coach, because as I travelled wider to more international competitions and further afield in my endeavours to get, in particular, David, more international experience, because I've always been a fan that international experience would help to grow your athletes if that's what their goal is and their capability is. Walking into some of those environments, especially in what's considered the holy grail of weightlifting, the super heavies, people would be quite confused as to why I was there. You know, I had to learn strategies to make sure I wasn't blocked at the scoreboard, strategies to make sure that my changes were seen, because there was often just this confusion as, what's this woman doing here? And when I took a team of young men, the New Zealand's team of young men in 2016 to Georgia, the country, acting as coach and manager, they would often ask these young men, where's your coach? Where's your coach? You know, it's me. You know, I was never there just to hold the towel, but we have to respect cultures. We have to, our voice is sometimes in how we respect that seeing a woman in this world is very, very different. And I can say I've seen the shift over the years. You know, it might just be that it's a little nod of an acknowledgement from countries where having women in this field is so very, very different. Or they might take my hand and congratulate me. I mean, that's huge. And I recognise that that's been my way a little bit of having a voice. But there's also times when you have to stand up and have maybe a little bit of a louder voice. So one of the training halls, someone had taken over our platform. And as you know, the training hall gets quite busy at Worlds. And if you don't get your platform, you don't get to train, you get to get kicked out. And I had to really, really stand up. It's difficult when not everyone speaks English, and the same must be on the other side of that coin. So you have to stand up for your athletes, and there's a time and a place for that. You know, Kyle, I just loved that quote that you said, which was, coach us like men, treat us like women. I think that is so powerful. And I want to say that if we bring that back domestically to our club culture, is that what's happening? Are our women in some of those spaces being treated like women? Because I often hear that they're not. And it's up to us to check the temperature domestically, because there's been a real shift to have women come into these spaces. And I really salute and acknowledge the courage that has taken. Perspective 3, keep learning. You know, we expect our athletes to turn up every day and give their very best. We should expect the same of ourselves. And I found that because I live a little bit away from the gym, that I would do my reflections when I was driving home. But the reflections were about the athletes, not about me as the coach. You know, what could have I done better? You know, not so much about the programming, but the other things that coaching involves. And so since then, I've started a reflections journal, and I have a focus point that I'm working on because I feel like I haven't maybe been as good in that area as I want to be. And that's helped me to be a lot more intentional. And I really, really recommend it. I also have what I call my table of 3. And as David got more successful, I became more aware of politics and sport, the power games. And, you know, as a coach and an athlete, when you're a team, you want to keep learning and striving to learn. So I created this support group that I call my table of 3, from business and from other sports, that outside of my sport. And what that did was bring me different perspectives. And the learning that I've got from that, when we sit down and review performances, or we review some of the things that have happened, they bring a much better, maybe less emotive, you could say, because they're outside of the sport. So I would recommend you create your own table, your own support network. I think I've also been very fortunate to have been invited into New Zealand's High Performance Women in Coaching Initiative. And I'm part of the extension group, which brings together a select group of women from other sports. And we meet monthly, just on Zoom. And there's always a topic of conversation. But it's so interesting to know that in some ways our sport is no different from other sports. As women, we often work in isolation. We have that additional challenge of capability over, shall we say, conditions, which is simply put, as women, we start off as an athlete. But then we have those choices, family. How do we balance athlete life to coaching life? How do we balance the financial impact of coaching and families? How do we balance the opportunities to get to the international platform with financial, family, work? Are we enabled as women to do that? Because I know it's cost me a fortune, an absolute fortune, to follow this dream and this passion, which is about my own athletes' goals. So I know as women, we want to be chosen for our capabilities and our competencies. We don't just want to be a tick box. So you've got to find the ways that you can keep learning, that you can keep extending yourself, that you can get the support so that you can follow your passion. We're in our training environment, I guess, like 95 to 99% of the time. And I think it's here that we develop the magic, yeah? When I grew my business to the point that I actually had a gym alongside my education company because I was tired of trying to use other facilities and I wanted my own club, I reignited and reinvented the secondary school program with the school that David came from and some of my other lifters, because it was a 5-minute walk away. I called it my give back, It was free of charge, and we enlisted the help of a teacher to help us master the kids regularly, so they'd come across, and sometimes there was a lot of them. And so I had to get my more experienced lifters and the teacher to help me. I'd created a system, so we had a plan and a system for teaching these kids. The teacher used to get really, really frustrated because sometimes they'd come, sometimes they wouldn't come, sometimes other sports would take them, and he wanted to make them accountable. And he wanted to do that by, if you don't come, you're out. It never sat with me, and I wouldn't let that policy be introduced. I have an open door policy because these young people didn't come because their families needed them. They had to go home to look after their siblings because mum and dad were at work. In fact, they may not have even made it to school that day. Sometimes because they were so talented, the other sports would steal them. Well, that's actually a good thing because their weightlifting skills will transfer really well into other sports. So that's fantastic. I always considered it to be a safe place for these young people. And you could see that by sometimes when they came in, they just slept. They just felt safe. And we know that, I'll rephrase how I'm going to say that, every athlete's an individual and we coach the individual, whether that's male or female. And there's been some good points made about that today. but the support around each of those athletes is often very different. And to help them realize their goals, the level of support that you might have to choose to give is different. For instance, 2013, I managed to get some of these young school youth lifters qualified for our New Zealand Nationals, which was down in Christchurch. In fact, David was one of them, and his mate Anthony, who both came from the same school into the program. Very exciting. The school got behind, we fundraised to get the money to go down there, and the school fundraised to provide some money for food, because neither of these families had a lot of money. So, on the plane, get down there, got my plan for the team. So first stop, supermarket. All right, get the food. So we sorted for our 4 days down in Christchurch. These two young men had their money. I followed them around the supermarket, noting that they put healthy stuff in their trolley, but there was no way the amount of money they had was going to cover what was in that trolley. So I just made sure that I was at checkout, and they looked at me, and they're literally counting out coins here, trying to meet the amount of money that the food cost. So I picked up the shortfall, congratulated them on what they had put in their trolley, and felt really, really proud, that they cooked their own dinner that night, that they were trying so hard to be athletes. And in fact, at that competition, I'm going to tell you, David only weighed 133 kilos. His best snatch was 96, and his best clean and jerk was 134. He was 17 years old, and he was one of those athletes that came and went. Same with his partner, Anthony, and yet look where they both are today. I couldn't resist this one, you got to keep it fun. It's one of my philosophies, and this was their contribution to our fundraiser we had at the gym one day. They had the kissing booth. Not that I think anybody took them up on it. I also have this thing we call the T word, all right? And when we had the gym, we had these grey panels that you had to walk through to come into the weightlifting area. It was an open plan gym, but it, kind of made it safe, shall we say. And I got really tired of when they come in, how are you today? I'm tired. How are you today? Tired. So the T word is not allowed in our gym, because I consider it to be a virus. All right, if one comes in tired, the next is going to be tired. Oh, I'm tired. What happens to the attitude? What happens to the atmosphere? It's certainly not fun anymore. So that's just a little aside that I do. Last but not least, you've got to be true to yourself. I coach the whole person, and it's been something I always do. I recommend you keep a reflections journey about you, the coach. Create your own pathway. Find your own opportunities, because where there's a will, there's a way. Uphold each other as women, and always remember what's possible. I have to say that my family have supported me throughout. I'm a solo mum with 3 sons, and they have stood behind me 100% all the way. The trips away, usually on their birthdays, which they like to remind me of quite frequently. And what's more, they've accepted my lifters as part of family. So my family is also my weightlifting family. I'm still writing my story, and it's a long way off finished. I've got some goals to achieve for my lifters. It's my purpose and it's my passion. And I hope that today that in some way I've inspired you to follow your passion and shown you what's possible. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you very much. Inspiring, and I just had to laugh at some points. But also, I think that this is, again, you mentioned family, you mentioned doing things together with a passion, and this is exactly why we're here also today, and that I hope that we have gotten more stronger this evening, and just being able to meet our friends. I don't think the kissing booth would work. I guess maybe if we had our masks on. but definitely meeting everyone, meeting our families, and talking about sports, and talking about weightlifting, being strong, both inner strong and outer strong. So thank you, Tina. I would now like to ask Sarah Davies if we have some questions. I see that some people have tried to raise their hands, but have we received questions that we might?
No, unfortunately, like you said, there's been a few raised hands, but no actual questions come through, which is disappointing. Yeah, I mean, there's more people popping their hands up. They should be able to see the little Q&A thing at the bottom to type a question in, hopefully. Maybe now people have stopped talking, but I'd like to say, as an athlete, and as a coach myself, I found all of that really interesting, because you know, I'm still learning and very much in my early days of coaching. So yeah, really interesting to hear that from everybody. So thank you.
Okay, so we will then call it an evening, call it a day, call it a morning, call it an afternoon. And I want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you for our presenters, and thank you our panelists, and good weightlifting. Bye-bye to everyone.